Help capture the history of our markets by contributing to the John Lothian News GoFundMe campaign to support the Markets Wiki Education history-focused video series and more.
My undergrad was philosophy and politics, but I realized pretty soon after that, at the peak of the dotcom boom and bust, that it wasn't very practical. So I went back to do a master's just outside of London, and applying for various jobs as a grad or a post-grad. Myself, as well as a lot of my counterparties who studied finance and investment banking, we all thought that we would either be corporate financiers, traders, or salespeople. But we realized pretty quickly that it was a much bigger world other than that. And in fact, I got on the tech and ops grad scheme at JP Morgan and found my way into futures, the futures brokerage, which was run at that time by Richard Berliand and Jerome Kemp as well in Europe. And I was working within various technology and operational roles, essentially supporting the nascent electronic trading access that we had only just started granting clients. So this would have been in about 03 or 04. And that's essentially how I ended up within banking and ended up within JP Morgan's futures brokerage. Futures was a little late to the game, following the footsteps of cash equities in terms of the electronification. At the beginning, there was a number of different native exchange terminals, different particular terminals that would sit not necessarily on the floor, but on the bank's own trading desks. That was sort of aggregated where possible into a number of standard cross exchange single platforms. SunGard's GL, Global Trade, that was, I think, back in the day, and TT were essentially the big contenders, at least within the sell side broker desks themselves, and the rest of the floor, what we regarded as the house. So not the pure agency desk placing orders on behalf of the clients and our house desks, but the guys themselves who, rather than speak to our desk, might want to press the buttons, and hey, they're sitting in the same offices as our agency desk, so why not give them access and free up some of our traders to speak, and salespeople to speak to the clients directly. So GL and TT were the big ones, but that said, there was a number of other multi-broker platforms that had just sort of started up. I mean, I think we had CQG, was it RealTick, the big buy-side platforms like the Aladdin's, Charles Rivers, and the like. And some of those happen to be cross-asset as well, although obviously from the point of view of the broker, and JP Morgan in this case, who I was working for, we'd only see the particular flow related that they'd sent on the drop down on the ticket to ourselves, and specifically only the futures flow. And in a lot of ways, we were blind, I would say, even on the level one support role that I did at the beginning, to actually what the client saw, what buttons that they were pressing. And we would trust that our implementation guys, or let's say the Charles River or Aladdin implementation teams of engineers, had mapped the contracts correctly, and the fixed flow that was coming in, when they selected, COMEX silver, that they weren't trading or sending, CBOT wheat or something. So there was a lot of teething problems and integration specifics that required a lot of focus back then. But this was, and it felt to me as a relatively young grad, that we're thrown in at the deep end, and really, be it the client's technical team, the end trader at the client, and indeed our desk. No one really knew how the joins between all these systems completely worked and what was seen at either end. So I don't want to really call it the Wild West. There was obviously controls and the like, but it was an extremely exciting time and great opportunity to learn how the systems connected and how people trade, which was entirely new to me back in the early 2000s. I have a few stories, some of which I still, even with decades that's passed, I probably still can't repeat. That said, I was lucky to work in a place that was incredibly controlled as much as it was aware back in the early days, where risk was taken seriously. Sometimes we'd learn the hard way from particular clients trading particular products that needed to be risked in a certain way. But given that we were a brokerage that wanted to provide full service, so the usual bifurcation of execution business or execution only business and clearing business, we like to suggest, or maybe there was pressure put on the clients, look, you're doing business with a top tier broker, you really should give us the execution as well as the clearing. And by that, we were able to develop, and our vendors were able to develop more controls that allowed us to better provide safely access to the traders. But in the very early days, and I'd seen it with some platforms, that there was a system-wide setting for a maximum order size and number of lots, and that was it. I mean, there was no product by product setup and set of restrictions, and to a large degree, a per lot limit, that's a very crude limit compared to some sort of P&L limit or some notional value limit, or looking at options, which again, there was a whole big challenge, particularly because we're not providing access to thousands of clients, far from it. Okay, they're big name institutional names. It was a learning process from the beginning as to what was right for risk, in terms of our capabilities as a brokerage, and how we could encourage the industry as a whole to develop best practice. And there was always those considerations of maybe other brokers that were cutting it a little too fine. Certain risk controls weren't necessarily put in place, and that might hamper our efforts. But in the long run, that protected us from all manner of different blow-ups. I once was sitting on a desk and being the monitor of algorithmic orders as well, and having that access, we would see all rejections. And I noticed, I think it was an 8-digit quantity of lots put in a contract. And then I noticed that it had a great similarity to a telephone number. So I rushed around onto the desk, and of course the trader had his head in his hands. I said, "Did you try and dial a number and type it in the quantity field in your ticket and try and send that through to the exchange?" And he said, yeah. I said, well, the good news is that our risk controls work, and it caught it. So wasn't an error, but was a close one. But I do remember it wasn't an error, but it was my first real appreciation of risk, going down to the equity trading, derivatives trading floor at JP Morgan, just off London Wall, and telling the head of the equity desk, execution desk, yeah, this works now. You can place this order. He said, okay, I'm going to place an order on this other contract that you're telling me should be rejected. And you know what? I'm going to put it into a special account. The account is called Robin. So he types my name into the account number. He says, well, you should be pretty sure, because this is actually your risk now if I send this through. And it gave me a brief pause, momentary pause, where I thought, okay, yeah, I am sure he can do this. And thankfully it was rejected as I was planning. But yeah, it's learning the hard way. There's nothing like having skin in the game. I think we were in a relatively advantageous position because the broker that I worked for had owned essentially or taken to manage themselves vendor software. So it was put through extremely rigorous testing. Exchange upgrades were really a little bit on the dull side. You know, you're essentially making sure that, you know, functionally and technically that the orders that you send through are getting to the exchange test environment and behave as they should and don't have any nasty bugs in there. That said, being one of the largest brokers, we were in the situation where often we would find and do more rigorous testing than the vendors themselves, even if we had smaller technical resource. We were just closer to the market. And even with some of the exchanges as well, there were situations where calls were made that, you know, vendor software just isn't in any shape or form. And if the exchange pressed ahead with their deadlines, then they would find that a number of their biggest brokers weren't supporting certain functionality, or worse, just couldn't trade under their memberships on the exchange. So we found we were in a situation where we had quite a lot of weight in guiding the exchanges, the venues themselves, as to what was a reasonable set of deadline and phasing for new functionality. And similarly, given our position, even though we felt we weren't necessarily cutting edge technology, often the prop trading firms were a few steps ahead. They could develop faster and essentially take a little bit more risk. With our technology, it was a patchwork really of different vendors, and then slowly but surely more in-house products that were either overlaid or integrated alongside some of the trading access. So absolutely keeping track of the exchange upgrades and essentially the mergers. I mean, that was a huge ongoing amount of time and resource that brokers had to spend keeping up with that. I suppose, given the sort of the reduction in the total number of exchanges and all of the merging activity and acquisitions that went on, it ended up, and particularly the fact that many exchanges run the same underlying soft matching software now, it became easier and easier to support in that respect. And then more time could be spent, definitely in my era around the sort of late 2000s and early 2010s, in developing more front-end technology around how to best add on to the execution management software, the EMS side of it. There were a few things that we were able to bring in, and absolutely the order management side, which were the OMS that sort of sat on top of the EMS and eventually sort of typically amalgamated in one, but also in the algorithmic space. So that went through a number of different sort of phases globally, and that went hand in hand with offering low latency access to some of the more exotic markets as well. After my few years rotating on the grad scheme into level 1 support and picking up calls to irate client traders and guys on our desk and trying to explain what technically we didn't quite understand, I sort of moved on and had the opportunity to design an order management system with a particular vendor. And this was really an eye-opener because it gave me insight as to how that was attempted twice before. And between the broker and the vendor that they used for those previous attempts, things fell through the gap. Either the requirements from the desk weren't quite understood, or the developer went away and spent too long without coming back and iteratively showing the designs and then the proof of concepts of what they'd built. But in the end, those order management systems just weren't capable of doing what they needed to do. And because I'd spent a couple of years on the support side, I was in a unique position where I really felt and sympathized with the pain that some of the traders would go through and how they'd use the platform. So, and I was no stranger to the trading desks themselves. So rather than sitting up on the 12th floor of London Wall, I would go and spend time with them. In actual fact, some of them, they like to chat amongst themselves, and they don't like people particularly from technology, just drifting around and hanging around. It might put them off their highly skilled and honed skills around execution. But I told them, look, I'm here to shadow you. It's not going to get built in any way that will work for you unless you accept the fact that I'm going to be here for a good 6 hours a day, including in busy period. And I'm going to ask you lots of what you might regard as pretty dumb questions as to what you're doing, what you're writing on the paper tickets, why you're stamping that on the timestamp machine, the various events, how you're talking and interacting to the clients, particularly if the clients are sending in fix orders and it's coming up on a web page that has to be refreshed every now and again. I mean, this is the sort of crude initial systems that were there on some of the desks. Now, I had this opportunity and I used it to the full extent to go down to the various trading desks that we had, commodity, equity, fixed income, and the like, as well as the house clients, to really try and understand, how they were working with paper tickets, with spreadsheets, with email, with rudimentary web pages, to try and get a feel for how a system could be created to help manage those orders. So they didn't have to set a number of different little alarm clocks so that they could VWAP an order in to achieve the volume weighted average price, just based upon essentially the time slicing functionality. I arrived after writing all of that down with what I thought was some rudimentary blueprints. I was very fortunate in dealing with a particular vendor that I'll mention, UL Link, now Itivity and now part of Broadridge, in fact, because they were very, very open. They're a small vendor. They understood the sort of glue and the fixed messaging, but they wanted to create a product, a platform. And really, I had the luck of working with them and working with some exceptionally talented technical guys within JP Morgan out in the New York office. And so I would go over to Paris and share, particular designs of how I wanted the platform to look. And one of my bosses, Antonio Lucena, I'll give him a shout out. He said something that stuck with me as well. He said, Robin, iterations in code are a lot more expensive than iterations on paper. So I took that as free rein to draw out and design storyboards, almost like a comic, to say, this is what the screens will look like, this is what the tickets will look like for an incoming fix order, how it's accepted, how the fills are then represented when it's released to the market, and partly filled and fully filled, and then how that can be then controlled in terms of notification and reporting back to the client. So I broke it down to the absolute atomic sort of components of what the desk were trying to do. Now I drew that out, shared that with the vendor to see if that was possible, and expected some iterations between the vendor and myself, even on paper rather than code. And then playing that back to the guys on the trading desk. And in fact, getting the guys on the trading desk to leave the desk, maybe after market hours, but spend time in a meeting room looking at the drawings. Again, something that at first they're a little bit resistant to, but in the end they recognized that this was the way they could get a platform built for their own benefit. And I had the fortune as well to work with people like Neil Treloar, who was ex-Life Floor, understood the dynamics of trading as well, and would get in 2 hours earlier. So about 6:30 a.m. we would start. He said, Rowan, I can give you a couple of hours to teach you all these dynamics of trading that he had picked up from his days on the Life Floor, but only if I could do that 2 hours before everyone got into the office, or at least everyone that wasn't a trader got into the office. So that was really the background to my approach for designing the OMS platform. And this was something, and these were the things that I sort of relied upon, both, expertise. It is all about the people that you work with and how much you can listen to them and get them to share what they know and what they want, trying to work that out and play that back to them to design a platform that works. And so the phase one of URLink's order management system was to receive fixed order flow and be able to capture that and then release that to the various markets, control the relay of fills back to the clients. And so that happened perfectly on time, on budget. And actually, since then, all of the subsequent phasings and then the work I've done with other trading platforms like Fidessa, I can happily boast that we never had any technology-related trading errors, which I think, given the vast amounts of functionality that we were deploying and the fact that these order management systems weren't just used across a handful of desks in London, but in fact 10 locations across, the 3 regions that we dealt with, and how they interact with each other with Follow the Sun global order routing. Well, that's I do take that away as a win.
John Lothian News would like to thank those individuals who have contributed to our Markets Wiki Education GoFundMe campaign. Their financial assistance allows us to produce and distribute videos like this for our Open Outcry Traders History Project or the Path to Electronic Trading video series. Join them in supporting John Lothian News, capturing the history of our industry.